Hello and welcome to BTC Channels. My name is Liam and today I want to show you in detail how I came across these lovely channels and how you can draw them by yourself if you want. I also want to talk about the three different types of scales, the linear scale, the log scale and the log-log scale, which is a very interesting one for Bitcoin because there we can see that Bitcoin follows a certain law so far, the power law. Let's jump in. A linear scale is when every value on the scale has the same distance apart. So if you go from 0 to 1000 to 2000, 3000, 4000, every value has the same distance on the y-axis and the x-axis. On the logarithmic scale, the x-axis remains the same, but on the y-axis you can see that the numbers increase exponentially, mostly by a factor of 10. So we have here 10 to the power of 1, 10 to the power of 2, 10 to the power of 3 and 10 to the power of 4. Now let's see how Bitcoin looks in these two scales. So now we are here at coinmarketcap.com. We see the Bitcoin chart since 2010, and as I go further to the right here, we see these huge upward movements from Bitcoin. For example, here in 2013, we went here from $10 to over 100 to nearly $200, and a year later we went to over $1,000. So it's crazy how Bitcoin is scaling up here by over a factor of 10. And as I go further to the right, these bull markets here are nearly gone. So what I can do now to see all the price actions is I tap here on the log button, and now the price is displayed logarithmically, and this is because this exponential factor that Bitcoin has in it is inverted, and this is because the y-axis has this exponential factor already in it. Now we see Bitcoin in a log-log scale, and that means that on both axes, for the price and the time, the values are displayed logarithmically. And the interesting thing about this, you can see Bitcoin follows a straight line to the upside. This chart is even more interesting in my opinion because it shows Bitcoin here in the log-log scale again, but the x-axis starts with the first block that was ever mined, called the Genesis block. And it advances by a factor of 10 here, also true for the y-axis, and as we can see, Bitcoin follows this linear line here to the upside. It's incredible how accurate Bitcoin always comes down here to this bottom line, which is indeed a linear line to the upside. So what does it mean that Bitcoin moves up in that kind of way in that scale environment? It shows that Bitcoin follows a power law, but what is a power law? I will show you that in the next slide. Power laws have been studied in various fields, including physics, biology, economics, and sociology. They are very common in natural and social phenomena, such as how long it takes for planets to orbit around the sun, the frequency of words in a language, the size distribution of cities, the magnitude of earthquakes, the distribution of income, and many others. So now we know nature loves power laws, and they are hidden in mathematical patterns that exist everywhere in the universe. But what does it mean, for example, that we have a power law in the frequency of words? It means that the second most popular word shows up half as often as the one most popular word, and that the third most popular word shows up 1/3 as often as the first, and the fourth word will show up 1/4 as often, and so on and so on. The crazy thing is that it applies for every language. Another example is the relationship here between the body mass and the metabolic rate. A small bird or a mouse, for example, has a small metabolic rate. A big animal like a horse or a bull has a large metabolic rate. So with that power law, we can predict the metabolic rate an animal has with a specific body mass. And as you can see, each graph has an advancement by a factor of 10 on both axes. So does it mean that Bitcoin is predictable because it has followed a specific law so far? We clearly don't know it, but what we know is that in the last 15 years, Bitcoin so far has followed this natural law with over 95% accuracy, and that it is a decentralized network that can be used 24/7 with no trust parties, and that this network can develop freely like a product of nature. By the way, if you want to know more about the power law, you can visit the X-Profile BTC Power Law Plan G by Giovanni. He has a PhD in astrophysics and is very passionate about Bitcoin and the power law. He also has plenty of other interesting stuff you can look at if you're interested. For example, this one. It is a power law model for Bitcoin on the log chart with linear timescale. The model also has calculated a exponential decay, and it says that the $1 million mark will be hit by June of 2033. Again, this is only a model. We clearly don't know if it plays out like this, but it can be useful to look at. Now we are back here at the 3 color channels with 3 different degrees of steepness. One is very steep and bullish, one is flatter and more conservative, and one in between. And as you can see, I've marked the $1 million by near of July 2033. Again, this is just an orientation, not a prediction. But in my honest opinion, each of these channels will cross the $1 million line sooner or later. This chart only started in mid-2011, so we have earlier data that can extend, for example, the red line downwards. Now let me show you how we can draw these channels. Let's start with the blue perspective. All these lines here are extensions from the ground line, which are made a little bit thicker here. I will zoom in a little bit more so you can see all the important touch points. Make sure to turn on the log scale. Now our first touch point was the resistance here in the bull market of 2017. Then we had a little resistance and breakthrough. Then in the bear market we have multiple touch points, and it acted as support here. It finally broke through. Then we had a little resistance here, a little support here. This was a little support. Then this one is important. This one is important. Now our last touch points are these lows here in November and December of 2022. We had here a little bit of resistance 2 times, and then we broke through. What you can do now is to right click on the line and go to duplicate. Now you have the line and you can find the other touch points where Bitcoin always acted as support or resistance. Our next channel is the yellow or orange perspective. I will zoom in again so you can see the touch points of the ground line. We will start here in November of 2018. Make sure that you pay attention to the body closes. By the way, this is a daily chart. Now, here you see the first touch point, the resistance. Our next touch points were here in April and May. Again, pay attention to the body closes. They were exactly below here 2 times. The line was very well respected. Our next touch points you can see here in November of 2019. We touched it here multiple times and it acted like support. We had here 2 times a breakthrough, but 2 times, 3 times a support. Now we were briefly stopped here and then broke to the downside. Then we had here multiple support areas. And again, here the price moves up and below the line, slightly below, slightly above. Our next touch points were in September of 2020. We had here multiple days of support. Here again a support. Our next touch points were here in June of 2022. We had here 3 times of very precise resistance. And our last touch point we see here in January of 2024. We had here a short resistance and then here a kind of up and downward movement. And again, pay attention to the body closes. And again, you can duplicate your ground line and search for the supports and the resistances. You will be surprised how the price respects these lines. And finally, the red perspective. I will zoom in to show you the ground line. We will start here in October of 2014 with our first support, second support, then our third support, slightly above, and then a breakthrough. Our next touch points were here in May of 2017. Then we had here nearly a touch point in July of 2017. Our next touch point again here in November of 2018. These resistances in April and a short support. Then in October 19 we were here slightly below, here slightly above. Here we had a support again. Now we are nearly touching here in August of 2020. And we had a little support here in November of 2020. Our last touch point was in April of 2022. And then we had a breakthrough. Now again, you can duplicate your ground line and you will be surprised how this line will be respected even in the early stages, 2010, 2011. We had here multiple resistances and supports all the way up to the current price movements. I recently saw some analysts that have used this channel here with this bottom line and this upper line here. Now it is important to mention that these channels doesn't predict any price movement or any direction, and that the distances between those lines are variable and that they depend on the points of contact. I try my best to cover the most of the contact points like TA analysts would do. So far these channels are working very well for me for several years now, but we will see in the future where the trend goes and whether there are new channels to follow. That's why I already have the 3 perspectives to diversify my view a little bit more, and they're still respected at specific levels by the price movement. I hope you took something with you. Have a nice rest of the day. Bye bye.